Hello my dear friends, how have you been? I'm Arith Härger and today I'm going to talk about the ancestors in animism. The subject of the ancestors is often widely spoken, especially among neo-pagans and of course in other New Age religious manifestations. But the perspective towards the ancestors always seems to go either towards a fantastical idea of an unbroken line of people who belong to a specific race or a unified, unique culture with unbroken belief systems, or the ancestors are often viewed as any human person of a given family who died and automatically becomes an ancestor of the living family members. So, since I have decided to start January 2021 with videos concerning animism, to also rectify and revise some of my past claims and some of my own past videos concerning precisely animism, I thought it would be useful to understand the case of the ancestors in animism, which perhaps will help to give a different understanding and perspective on how New Age religious manifestations view the ancestors, especially for the Western society, our Western society, which has been highly detached from animistic worldviews, unfortunately. And in the past 100 years or so, the rise of neo-pagan religious manifestations avoided animism, and as such, neo-paganisms were very much constructed upon the same foundations and lines of thought as monotheistic religions, but with highly romanticized and politicized concepts to better adapt and fit into the modern social views, patterns, and morals, which have nothing to do with paganisms of the past and certainly very, very different from animistic perceptions. In animism, not every human person becomes an ancestor upon death, and not every dead human person is accepted as an ancestor by the living human persons of the family, community, tribe, or even society. So I am quite certain a couple of people will not enjoy this video, as the belief on the ancestors and what constitutes an ancestor in animism completely go against modern notions and perspectives of ancestry. But I am also quite sure that many more will enjoy this video, because I know the type of audience I have, at least in this channel. Very bright people, open-minded, from different backgrounds, eager to learn, but also eager to share their knowledge with me, which I greatly appreciate. And as such, yet another perspective will prove to be useful to add to your personal baggage of knowledge. Now, just before we start, as you can see, I am dressed differently, but quite comfortable and cozy. And it's also called fashion. Look it up, it's a thing. I bought this hoodie from Valhyr, and now I'm part of the cool kids. And I think it stays good on me. And no matter what you say, it won't change my mind or make me think otherwise. So, if you have the time, of course, do visit the website of my friend Valhyr and check the merchandise and also his Instagram, where you can find the beautiful artistic works he makes. Of course, as always, I'll leave the links down below in the description of this video. Susur aita wo sebe, manaoirin sude. Now, with no more delay, please, let's get started. Very well, before we delve into the subject of the ancestors, perhaps it will be a good thing to speak about the case of the other than human persons, which I've talked about in other videos and are somewhat intimately tied to the ancestors or to the persons that can become ancestors. As you know, animism deals with persons, with the belief that the world is populated with persons, and the great majority are non-human persons. So, we have the human persons, right? Then the non-human persons, which would be the persons we often call animals, but also trees and rocks and the wind and the hills. So mainly the fauna and flora, of course, and specific geological and geographical features, as well as natural phenomenon. And then we have the other than human persons, which sometimes are also referred to as more than human persons. Although this idea of being more than something already implies the category of spirits or entities that maintain power beyond that of human persons, which could be the entities we often understand to be deities, but also trickster spirits and the ancestors. So these last ones are the more than human persons. They have an existence which permits them to have power and manifestations of power beyond that of human persons, and with whom the human persons can interact with to acquire their manifestations of power and create a beneficial relationship with. Or some of these entities or spirits the human persons avoid having contact with precisely because they maintain power beyond that of human persons, which can be dangerous at times, quite harmful, unintentionally, but also sometimes intentionally. So, the more than human persons are indeed the entities that exist beyond any humane characteristic or essence, and the other than human persons would be the ones which, through a process of transformation, they become entities other than human, somewhere between the more than human and the non-human persons, whose existence is often marginalized as either mythological or folkloric creatures. But these creatures are entities the animistic person, the animistic individual, might engage with or attempt to avoid a diversity of other than human persons, right? So these are the entities we often label as fairy folk, elves, dwarves, trolls, giants, elementals, goblins, and so on and so forth. The creatures we often find in folklore and mythology. These are the other than human persons. They have nothing to do with humanity in terms of personality, characteristics, the very essence of their existence, but they are not quite non-human persons either, because these entities are not animals, or rather, they are not part of the fauna and flora and the landscape features and natural phenomena. They are others, the others. However, some of the human persons might become these others. As I have pointed out in the previous video concerning the life force, spirit and soul in animism, the human person has a multitude of choices, a diversity of existences, and the human person may or may not become an other than human person. Upon death, through a process of transformation, the human person might become a spirit of place, might become a mound dweller, an elf or a dwarf. It may reside in a hill, a mountain, become the entity of a specific rock or landscape feature. So the human person may become a non-human person or also an other than human person. But it may also become an ancestor, and that category, so to speak, is a more than human person, reaching a state of existence whose personal power this entity now maintains and possesses is beyond that of human persons. They become powerful and can reach out or being reached out by the living human persons. And an exchange of power can be provided for the benefit of the living human persons, but also for the benefit of the ancestor, who is now a more than human person. But we shall get to that. But just so we can make this a little bit more understandable, the human person, upon death, there is a multitude of choices, a diversity of aspects, and many things can happen. And through processes of transformation, the human person, or rather what we call spirit or soul of that former human person, can become something else, can become a non-human person, an other than human person, and can also become a more than human person. If the human person, upon death, of course, becomes an ancestor, as an ancestor, this entity is now in the category of more than human persons, whose power is beyond that of human persons, as I've said, and its contact with human persons is facilitated by the living human persons themselves, who acknowledge this person as an ancestor, and therefore the living human community wants to continue to maintain a connection with this ancestor, with this person, with this more than human person. But returning to the other than human persons, these are not the type of entities or spirits that can be immediately interacted with through physical contact. Their own existence is beyond a singular embodiment, which means they may not have an embodiment at all, or they might have multiple embodiments. But they are not immediately perceptible in the physical landscape. That's what I mean. Of course, this doesn't mean that they are dead. No. It only means this is their existence. That's their nature. There's such a diversity of entities and therefore multiple behaviors, habits, and interactions, which obviously, when we interact with such entities, the social reciprocal actions also vary quite a lot. These entities and spirits act towards humans and other persons in many different ways, and most of the time it is unpredictable, and they might be hostile or not. So the animistic human person does its best to understand which entities are indeed worth interacting with and which ones have to be avoided. And of course, what sort of actions might provoke, let's say, more negative or positive behavior in these social interactions towards these persons. Because some spirits can cause illness and others can heal. Some help in the growing and development of food resources and providing sustenance. Others do the exact opposite. Even the persons that help and provide something beneficial may at times refuse to do so because they are angry, or a taboo was broken, or a certain action caused disrespect. Some spirits eat the dead, others resuscitate them, etc. The point is, the diversity is enormous, and certain other than human persons might be known to the entire community of human persons, but the great majority are only known to a particular individual or a small group, or only to a particular spiritual leader, shaman as the general term. depends very much on the interaction and the variety of encounters and situations that lead to such encounters. However, certain other than human persons can be known through specific encounters or activities led by the community. Certain other than human persons and also more than human persons might be invoked or even invited to participate in ceremony, celebration, a particular festivity, a particular action. Their presence might be invited or they might make themselves known in various ways. It isn't only the human person that seeks encounters and interactions, but also certain entities seek interaction as well. Such interactions might be with good intent or bad intent, trickery, unwilling effects upon the community of human persons, disaster, blessings. It's really up to them and what they are expecting or their true intentions when the others seek interaction. In animism, many times it's hard to understand what entity or entities are provoking specific effects if they have not been invited by the human persons. Even those who are invited may not come, and other entities might take advantage of this and let themselves be known and provoke other effects. Perhaps a good example of this, I hope, to better illustrate what I'm trying to express, is the modern understanding of elves in various neo-pagan religious manifestations. Modern pagan understandings are highly formed by recent and more romantic notions of who the elves are. So, if a neo-pagan person invites an elf into his or her own domains or space of existence, an invitation whose aim is to, let's say, acquire protection, that person may be lucky and it's not really an elf that accepts the invitation, but an other than elf person, which will provide protection. But the real question is if we, modern pagans, even the animistic ones, can truly recognize the actual entity or entities that either provide aid or harm. We might or may not benefit from such interactions. The consequences vary because we may not immediately recognize which person accepted our invitation, at least not all the time. The point here is getting to know through experience, as I've pointed out on the previous video about animism. Animism being highly pragmatic, it relies on experience. We try to avoid inviting the presence of unwelcomed persons or try not to bother those who would rather not be bothered. We try to invite those who are welcomed or try to interact with those who want interaction. So we get to know, we gain experience, we gain knowledge, and certain entities and spirits become familiar through the effects they cause, and also through their actions and how they behave towards specific actions. So it's also about creating familiarity. So it's important to understand that unlike the modern romantic notions that have been created around animism and also, of course, paganism, we must understand that other than human persons may be powerful, but not all of them are friendly, helpful, or indeed welcomed. So it isn't just familiarity, but also through the symbiotic relationships we might create, other than human persons might get to know us as well, accept us, and create familiarity with us. Certain entities or spirits, we can create a privileged relationship, and they will act differently towards those they are more familiar with, and such relationships become more important than interactions we might have with other than human and more than human persons. The privileged relationship is often one that is beneficial and provides everyday life support through the encounters and interactions with powerful persons who are interested in helping us, and we are interested in helping them to continue the everyday life cycle. And this is when the case of the ancestors comes in. Not every human person upon death becomes an ancestor. Not everyone is accepted as an ancestor, and they must be known. Literally, their names must be known in order to invite them, or specifically invite who we want, so they might accept the invitation and we might recognize their presence and vital force because we know them, to avoid having another spirit or entity accept the invitation and cause unwanted effects because we do not recognize them and they do not recognize us. Familiarity. And familiarity in animism isn't because the ancestor once belonged to our family. Familiarity means knowing who this other than human or more than human person truly is. Ancestors in animism don't always have to be persons that once belonged to our family, or indeed human persons. Don't always have to be persons while alive, they shared the same blood ties. Many ancestors in animism are the persons who recognize us, we recognize them, they have formed a beneficial relationship with us and we with them. That's it. They become important to us while in life and after their process of transformation that led them to become ancestors. So let's see. Of all the persons that exist and inhabit the world and the cosmos, perhaps the most important of them all to the community of living human persons are the ancestors. What makes the ancestors different than us, and in a way, to a certain extent, different than all the other persons, is that they died. They were once living persons with embodiment, and they died, and some of them became ancestors. Indeed, not all those who die become ancestors. Even in cultures and religions that expect people who have died to continue on living or showing presence in some way, it isn't always understood and accepted that everyone, absolutely everyone, becomes an ancestor. The case of the ancestors as being the entire past members of a given family or the line of peoples from the human historical past, or even only the people that belong to a cultural self-identity is actually a modern and romantic idea, and more often than not, sadly, it is also to fit into certain political views as well. As I've pointed out on the previous video concerning the spirit, the soul, and the vital force in animism, what happens after death is a multitude of realities, choices. What happens after death is the continuation of the diversity of social lives established before the death and destruction of embodiment. If a person was considered a fool while alive, that person may not become greatly revered after death, which means that person may not be included among the ancestors. What makes an ancestor isn't only what we previously talked about, the familiarity and the beneficial relationships that can be created, but also the actions of that person in life will determine if the person is accepted among the ancestors by the living. Will the community of the living human persons praise, worship, call upon, invite a past member they didn't like? Will a murderer, rapist, a bigot, any fool who caused much damage and suffering be praised and called upon by the community and be included among the ancestors? It depends very much on what each living human person thinks about that other person that is now dead. Some will praise that person's actions, some will not. Some will accept that person among the ancestors and others will not. Depends on the relationship that is created and the knowledge the community of the living have in relation to that person. Not everyone is worthy of being praised and therefore not worthy of being accepted among the ancestors or even being remembered by. Also, death doesn't mean that the person becomes any different. In animistic societies, the ancestors are those who not only were powerful in life and whose actions gave great benefit to the community, but also those who, upon death, continue to extend their relationships with the community of the living, therefore increasing in power and wisdom, precisely due to the interaction they maintain with the living, through the exchange of gifts, exchange of actions, invitations, exchange of power, showing respect. A person may not gain extra power or wisdom merely because it died. Death doesn't automatically make someone better, powerful, and wiser. A person who was feared and hated in life will continue to be feared and hated after death by those who remain alive and know and remember that person. And after many centuries, that person indeed may end up being praised by those who no longer recognize them and no longer felt the effects of their actions. But this last point is what often happens in modern paganism, praising a fantastical notion of ancestors as unknown persons whose life and actions aren't truly known by the living who do not recognize them anymore. And that's not what happens in animism. An ancestor in animism is a person who is known. The name is known. The effects of their actions are known. It is a person who is recognized by the living, whose identity is accepted and respected, and there is a continuation of beneficial relationships with the living, interactions. And much of this is made evident in the giving of gifts and, of course, other expressions of respect. The living won't ask gifts from those they do not recognize or those they hate, fear, or deeply despise and whose actions are now condemned. As such a spirit won't have much power because such a spirit won't receive praise, no gift exchange, no importance in that community, therefore no real power to act in a beneficial way, therefore completely useless to the community of living human persons. And we go back to that other point of inviting entities or spirits. We must recognize them. There must be familiarity, otherwise we risk inviting a person who will only cause harm. So think about it. When people praise the ancestors, general ancestors, no specific names, no specific identities, just a general idea of ancestors, and invite the ancestors in, anyone can accept that invitation, any person, even those who are unwelcomed. Are we certain we want to invite rapists, murderers, fools, unwelcomed spirits, dangerous and evil spirits? For instance, a shocking and disturbing thought, I'm well aware. What if you come from a background whose people have been enslaved and some of your past family members were actually slave owners who raped the people they have enslaved? Are you going to let the invitation open to any of the persons responsible for the suffering of your people, your community? The same thought goes to some modern neo-pagan religious manifestations who fantasize about only having ancestors of a specific ethnicity and express hate and intolerance towards other ethnicities. So when they call upon the ancestors, are they really praising slave owners, racists? What about the ethnicities they show hate towards too, but in fact past members of their family are from those same ethnicities? Will the ancestors come to give gifts and protection and help their descendants that show hate and disrespect to their own people? Are they asking dead enslaved people to give gifts and to protect the community that enslaved them? What are the real ancestors people are inviting and perhaps even unwillingly and unknowingly praising and calling upon? Murderers, rapists, evil men and women, slave owners? What about modern pagans? Are they venerating and calling upon also their Christian ancestors? And even their pagan ancestors, who are they truly calling upon? The people who had several belief systems that have nothing to do with modern pagan notions, beliefs, values, and morals? In that same way, are Christians, Jewish, and Muslim peoples calling upon their own pagan ancestors? If we do not agree with human and animal sacrifice nowadays, are we praising those who did those things and thought it was normal and right? These are questions that provoke, obviously, fear, uneasiness, even hate and shock only to people who believe in a fantastical unknown line of ancestors. People who believe that their own ancestors shared the same modern values, morals, and notions, even fantastical ideas about their ancestors as being exclusively from a specific identity or a single ethnicity. These questions and fears do not appear to animistic individuals and communities and cultures towards the ancestors, because only those who are known and respected can become ancestors. Their names are known, so they can specifically be called upon, being invited, and we know them. We understand their actions, their manifestations of power are known, because it's not only a question of familiarity, but also mutual respect, acceptance, understanding, and the need to exchange gifts with them, exchange of power, familiar interactions. They share with us and we share with them knowledge, understanding, wisdom, acceptance, respect. Humanity evolves, and thank the gods, so does the human mind. What was normal and right, wrong and abnormal to a specific generation of the past isn't the same to the next generation and the generations that come after. The ancestors learn with us and we learn with them. The primary focus of ancestral worship, veneration, whatever, call it what you will, is to create significant encounters and experiences between persons to understand the nature of the world and to propitiate the continuation of the diversities of life upon death. And these relationships are also to propitiate the continuation of a life cycle, the exchange of wisdom and power, exchange of vital force, manifestations of power. Because not only the living person may become an ancestor, but also because the ancestor, in animistic terms, might also gain new embodiment and once again become a living human person or another living person. So exchange of knowledge and the creation of strong relationships in the multiplicity of existences is fundamental for the evolution of persons. It's not only about the evolution of mentality, but also the evolution of spirit, which will reflect upon the mentality. The idea is to propitiate a better outcome always. If the ancestor will once again inhabit a specific physical form and again live with embodiment in the world, that ancestor will surely want to live in a better world and not more of the same or worse. And for that to happen, the ancestor shares knowledge with the community of living human persons. And The human persons, of course, share knowledge with the ancestor in order to propitiate a better outcome, the continuation of evolution, and each spirit and each entity become more knowledgeable, precisely to create better conditions for those who come after, be those new persons or returned persons. Not every dead human person becomes an ancestor. We don't want that. The ancestors in animism are only those persons who are specifically interested in maintaining relationships for the benefit not only of the community, but the benefit of the whole. Those who continue to want to evolve and learn and share wisdom for a greater benefit, for a greater understanding. The creation of extraordinary encounters and experiences of great value. What have we to learn from spirits who refuse to learn and evolve and indeed refuse help? And what have the spirits and the ancestors to learn with the living who also refuse to learn and evolve and help? There must be mutual respect, mutual understanding, and from both sides, the willingness to learn and to create symbiotic relationships, mutually beneficial relationships. In animistic cultures in which the ancestors are in fact important and significant in the daily affairs, the term ancestors is actually most often used to refer to specific named individuals and not merely to some vague, undetermined collection of all who have died, as it was romanticized in modern religious manifestations. It's not solely a genealogical interest. Many times that doesn't even matter, actually. It's vitally important to know and use the names of ancestors while and when addressing them. It's quite simple, really, I think. An ancestor is only one with whom we relate, and the ancestor in turn relates with us. It is to continue relating. Doesn't have to be a question of blood ties, but mutual respect and familiarity with a being who becomes an ancestor, might not have been human while living, while alive. Of course, it's important to refer that dead persons are not understood and treated in the same way everywhere. Of course, from culture to culture, there are different approaches to the ancestors. To some cultures, the ancestors are a lot more important than to others. In some cultures, the ancestors may be venerated as powerful persons, but in others not so much, or even feared, actually. I'm not going to delve into each culture, obviously, as I am presenting general terms that present similarities and even equal understandings within the animistic worldview. But there's one important aspect that almost every animistic culture agrees with. Ancestors may participate in the daily lives of the living human persons, but the ancestors are no longer human. Death is a phenomenon of the body, of embodiment of the physical. Therefore, death is a bodily catastrophe and not of the spirit. Because the spirit is definitively separated from the body, the dead are not human anymore. Dead humans become spirits who can become something else. As I've expressed before, a dead human person after the abandonment of its human embodiment can become a non-human person, or an other than human person, or a more than human person. The latter means that the spirit of the former human person can become an ancestor. And the ancestor is a more than human person because it retains power beyond that of human persons. If the spirit of the former human person becomes a non-human person or an other than human person, that spirit is not an ancestor. However, it's important to take special notice that if the spirit becomes an ancestor, that ancestor can become something else at times due to its power. The ancestor is one who cares about the daily lives and affairs of the living human persons. So at certain occasions or in times of need, an ancestor may become a non-human person, let's say an animal. And that temporary form, the ancestor in animal form, may give itself up to the community to feed the community, and then return to spirit and embody another animal and continuously give itself to the community. Not every animal is an ancestor, but some ancestors may be animals at times. The spirit of the former human person upon becoming an animal doesn't automatically make that spirit an ancestor. The spirit of the former human person needs to become an ancestor first in order to inhabit other bodies at times. Again, we return to what was previously said. Not every dead human person becomes an ancestor, but some may. The ancestor, or the ancestors in general, continue to live on in very real ways, which is why animism, yet again, shows a world-accepting view and the importance of taking care of the earth we live in, because not only the ancestors may live in their own realm, of course, but they also continue to live in us and among us, in our physical lives. And as such, we continue to eat the product of the earth to which they have returned in one way or another. They, the ancestors, we continue to take care of the earth to which the ancestors have returned one way or another. Of course, this doesn't mean that in an animistic society animals are killed carelessly in mass because it's the ancestors giving themselves up. No, not at all. In fact, animistic societies are a lot more predisposed to accept a totally vegan diet, unless, of course, such communities live in places where it is impossible to have a plant-based diet. But on veganism and animism for another time. But as I have expressed on previous videos, since animals are understood as persons and can even be ancestors, eating an animal constitutes cannibalism because it's eating a person, which is a taboo. So the consumption of animals is only on specific occasions, in times of great need, or to acquire power, and other sceneries. And many ceremonies are held due to the breaking of taboo. But this paradox stays for another time. But it's important to refer, since I've told that some ancestors may indeed become animals, and since the relationship between human persons and ancestors is one of mutual help, mutual benefit, and also respect, the consumption of animals isn't taken lightly in animistic societies, and often involves the presence and work of a spiritual leader who can work as the intermediate and reason with spirits, so an animal may be provided for the community, sent by the spirits. So ancestors may also be consumed in a variety of ways, and this constitutes self-sacrifice of the ancestors, as animals who return over and over again to feed the human community with their own ever-renewable flesh. So I'm sure this reminds you of the bear consumptions in circumpolar regions and leaving the bones intact, so in ceremony they can be buried, and as such the bear can return, reborn in spring. As well as the case of Norse mythology of Thor's goats and the eating of their flesh, but leaving their bones intact, unbroken, so they may be resurrected. Among such other similar examples. Thor's goats are not just animals, they are persons. They are understood as persons in an animistic perspective. So, in this way, we understand an important understanding of the ancestors in animism, which is very different from the usual ideas we have of ancestors in the Western societies. Ancestors in animism are far from untouchable supernatural, or even metaphysical. They are known, they are very real, they are named, addressed, listened to. There is contact and gift exchange. However, ancestors are not human anymore, but something else entirely. They are more than human persons. The expressions and manifestations of the ancestors are essential in the continuation of the evolution of the community in life. Ancestors may mark their presence less often than human persons, of course, but they are not necessarily immaterial. Ancestors are transformed persons who, just like deities and trickster spirits, play an important role in the lives of living human persons because they are interested and care about the daily lives and affairs of humans. So that through gift exchange and manifestation of power, there may be a connection and the flow of life, so the cycle may continue. Ancestors are transformed spirits who have a very active role in the lives of living human persons. All right, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was useful. I'm sorry, but it's very cold today. I barely feel my hands. It's -2 degrees, but because of the humidity, the thermal sensation is actually -23 degrees. So it's very, very cold. You can really feel it in your bones. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. Visit the website and the Instagram of my friend Valhyr. Pretty cool stuff. And as always, Tack for idag. Thanks for today.